Hey everybody, welcome back to Mad Backyard. Today we're going to show you how to make a smoked chuck roast in an electric smoker. We'll show you how we pick out the best chuck roast for smoking, how we set up the electric smoker step by step, and of course, how to smoke it so that you get perfect tender beef every time. If you're thinking about smoking a beef brisket for the first time, but maybe want to try something a little smaller before committing to such a large piece of meat, then smoking a chuck roast might be your best bet. Even the smallest whole packer briskets, like the one we did in our electric smoker brisket video, are going to run about 9 to 12 pounds. And some of the large ones, like we cooked in our Pit Boss brisket video, are going to be in the 18 to 20 pound range. A chuck roast, on the other hand, is typically only about 3 to 5 pounds, and we can cook it in the exact same style as a beef brisket. Whereas a beef brisket comes from the chest of the steer, a chuck roast comes from the shoulder, right next to it. Both are hard-working, tough pieces of meat that definitely benefit from low and slow cooking. So smoking a chuck roast is a great way to practice before you take on that full-size brisket. Now, you'll notice when picking out a chuck roast at the store, they're not going to all be the same shape. Some of them will be flatter, like a large steak, and others will be more cube-shaped, like a pork shoulder or a roast. You can smoke either one of these. I personally prefer the ones that are shaped more like a cube or a roast versus the flatter steak style ones, but you can go with either kind. Just know the thicker the chuck roast, the longer it will take to cook. So if time is an issue for you, go with one of the flatter cuts. You also want to look for one that's at least choice grade, not select. This way it has more fat and marbling to help keep it tender and juicy during such a long cook. I'm not sure I've ever seen a prime grade chuck roast before, but if you find one and want to go for it, by all means. This choice grade one I got at Walmart was a nice thick roast shape and came in at just over 3.5 pounds. Sometimes a chuck roast will have a fat cap on it, but many times it won't. Just like with a pork butt, you really don't need to trim much of anything from a chuck roast. If there's a really obvious large hard piece of fat on one of the corners or hanging off the side, go ahead and trim that off. But otherwise, you don't really need to do anything. I didn't trim this chuck roast at all before I started cooking it. For a seasoning today, I'm using, you guessed it, Holy Cow rub from Meat Church. I've tried many different rubs on beef, but I always just keep coming back to this one because it has great flavor and great color and always gives me a really nice bark on my briskets and chuck roasts. I'll put a link to it down in the description if you want to check it out. I really don't think you can go wrong with anything from Meat Church. If you do want to make your own seasoning, I would recommend keeping it simple with some kosher salt and cracked black pepper, maybe a little bit of garlic or paprika. I would stay away from any kind of sugar or sweet barbecue rubs that would typically go on pork. It just doesn't work as well on beef, so try to keep things savory rather than sweet. You don't need to apply oil or mustard or any kind of binder to the beef before adding the seasoning. Just go ahead and sprinkle it on the raw meat. Let it sit on the meat for at least half an hour or so before you put it in the smoker. You can even wrap it in plastic wrap and put it back in the refrigerator overnight so that it's ready to go the next morning, and that way it's just one less thing you have to worry about before you start cooking. Okay, time to get our electric smoker set up. If you're brand new to using an electric smoker, make sure to stop and check out our video we made on how to use a brand new Masterbuilt Electric Smoker step by step. We go through everything, including setting the temperature, loading the wood chips, creating smoke, and even using a water pan. I'll put a link to that video down in the description, as well as right up here if you want to check that out before proceeding. But if you already know how to do all that stuff, go ahead and turn on your electric smoker and set the temperature to 250 degrees. I'm also using a water pan today. I like to fill a disposable aluminum pan rather than using the pan that comes with the smoker itself, just because it's easier to empty and saves me a lot of time cleaning my smoker later because it catches all the drippings. For my wood chips, I'm going to be using a combination of hickory and mesquite. Now, these are two of the strongest flavored smoking woods you can use, but I really like them on beef. Unlike chicken and fish, beef can really hold up to these strong aromas over the course of a long smoke without getting too smoky. Some people find they don't care for smoking with mesquite. I mean, it does have its own distinctive flavor and aroma, so if you've never smoked with it before, go easy on the amount until you decide whether you like it or not. Even I'm just going to be using one batch of mesquite to start with, followed by hickory for the rest of the cook. I'm not going to be smoking with mesquite the entire time. You can see today I'm using the Masterbuilt slow smoker attachment on my electric smoker. I really like it on these longer cooks because I can load up this whole chute with wood chips and it'll run for several hours before I need to reload. Unlike the standard loading tube on a Masterbuilt, which you need to reload about every 30 minutes as the wood chips smolder out. It also has its own heating element, so make sure to turn this on at the same time you're preheating your smoker so that it's nice and hot before you add your wood chips. This way you'll get a cleaner burn right from the beginning rather than getting a bunch of white, dirty startup smoke as that heating element heats up. Now, if you don't have the slow smoker attachment, just make sure to preheat your smoker before you add your wood chips so that you get the same result. But if you do a lot of smoking in your electric smoker, I would definitely recommend checking out the slow smoker attachment. I'll put a link to it down in the description as well. Once the smoker's up to 250 degrees with the water pan in place and your wood chips are making smoke, go ahead and put the chuck roast in the smoker on a rack right above the water pan. Now, typically on a beef brisket, I'm smoking it with the fat side up, but on this chuck roast, there is no fat side. So I'm just picking one side that I want to consider my fat side and that I want to get the best bark on, and I'm going to keep that side on the top throughout the entire cook. I'm going to smoke it the whole time with this side up, even when it's wrapped, so that the bark we develop on this side doesn't wash away. Once the meat's inside the smoker, try not to open that door unless you really have to. Every time you open that door, it lets out all your heat and all your smoke, and it also adds a lot of time to your cook. There's really not much to do for these first few hours other than reload wood chips to try to keep that smoke rolling. Make sure you've got the vents turned all the way open so that you're getting the most airflow possible and the cleanest burn on your wood chips. Cold meat absorbs more smoke flavor than hot meat, so your chuck roast is actually going to develop the most smoke flavor during these first few hours of cooking. So now is the time to make sure it's getting plenty of smoke. I like keeping the cooking temperature at 250 degrees when I first put the meat in rather than starting at 275 degrees, which is what we're gonna raise it to later. I don't know if this makes a gigantic difference, but it seems like the meat on the outside doesn't dry out quite as quick when I start it at this lower temperature, and I like to wait to see a little bit of fat render before I turn that temperature up to 275 degrees. And in the case of this chuck roast, that was after about 2.5 hours of cooking. Next, let's talk about total cooking time on this chuck roast. Now, because chuck roasts do come in so many different sizes and shapes, they are a little difficult to predict how long they're gonna take to cook. A chuck roast that's been cut thinner, more like a big steak, is gonna cook faster than one that's more cube-shaped because it's thicker and it's gonna take longer for that heat to reach the center of the roast. So while you may hear people talk about different rules of thumb, like allow an hour and a half of cooking time per pound or 2 hours of cooking time per pound, you really have to look at the thickness of the roast as well and not just go by weight alone. So the best way to do this is to use internal temperature as your guide and just let it take as long as it's going to take until it reaches that final target internal temperature. This 3.5 pound chuck roast I did in my electric smoker took 6 hours before we wrapped it, another 3 hours wrapped, and then I rested it for an hour before I sliced it. So that's 10 hours from start to finish. So the next logical question you're probably asking is, okay, well, if I don't know exactly how long it's going to take, how do I plan for when I serve it and when should I start it? Well, the answer to that is that it's always better to finish early when you're smoking large pieces of meat like this. I've said it in my pulled pork videos, my brisket video, and I'm going to say it right here again with a smoked chuck roast. It's always better to finish early. The reason being is that you can hold that chuck roast in a warm smoker or a warm oven at a food safe temperature, and I'll show you exactly how to do that later on in the video. And that way it's ready to go whenever you're ready to eat. It's a much better way to cook versus trying to time your food to be done exactly when it's time to eat, because if it takes longer than you anticipate, everyone's going to be standing around hungry, wondering when the food's going to be ready. This way, if you have it done a few hours ahead of time, you can just relax and know that it's ready to serve whenever you're ready to eat. So if you're cooking a thicker chuck roast like mine, you can use that 10-hour window as kind of an estimate, but build in a few more hours of extra time as well to give yourself that buffer. I'm using my meter leave-in probe thermometer. You've seen me use it in almost all my videos on large pieces of meat like this. A little trick is to hold the probe on top of the meat until you get the point centered, and then pinch your fingers at the edge and then put it in the side and slide it in until your fingers hit the edge of the meat. That way you know the probe has gone in the exact distance you want it to and reached the very center. A lot of people ask me what my favorite types of thermometers to use are, and for leave-in probe thermometers on large pieces of meat like this, I always point them towards the Meter or the Meter Pro, Meter Plus. There's a few different variations of them, but I love not having to mess with any wires. It connects easily to my phone so I can watch the temperature not only of the meat, but the air temperature of my smoker as well. It has a really simple app to use. You can pick your exact kind of meat and exactly what kind of device you're cooking it in our case, a smoker. And it even tells you how much longer it's going to take to cook based on how fast it's been cooking up to that point, kind of like how a GPS works in your car. So it's a really handy tool to have, especially when you're using an electric smoker and you don't want to have to keep opening that door to use an instant read thermometer. You can just put the probe in, leave the door shut, and keep all that heat in place so that you're not losing your heat over and over again every time you check the temperature. Just like with our briskets, we're going to wrap our chuck roast in butcher paper when it reaches the stall. The stall is that time period where the inside of the meat reaches about 150 to 160 degrees Fahrenheit, and water really begins to evaporate, and fat and collagen begin to melt, and the internal temperature of the meat stops rising. Now, you don't have to wrap to get through the stall. Eventually, the meat will continue rising in temperature. But many people do like to wrap briskets and pork butts and chuck roasts because it helps keep the outside of the meat from drying out while you're waiting for the inside to continue cooking. Trapping more of that heat and moisture also kind of helps power through the stall, which allows the chuck roast to cook a little faster than it would otherwise if you didn't wrap it. Now you can use aluminum foil if you don't have pink butcher paper, but just know it's going to trap a lot more moisture inside than the butcher paper will and probably cause a lot of your bark to wash away. I would eventually get some pink butcher paper if you enjoy barbecuing because it makes a huge difference, especially on beef. It helps trap the heat and power through the stall, but also lets enough moisture escape that your bark stays intact. Make sure you specifically use food grade pink butcher paper that has no wax lining. So how do you know when it's time to wrap? Well, it's not exactly based on temperature alone, but just because you've hit 150 degrees doesn't necessarily mean that's the best time to wrap. You want to really look at your bark as well and make sure you've got a nice dark color, that it's set up well, that scraping your finger over the top doesn't cause the seasoning to move. The darker color you can get and the more that bark's set up on the outside of the chuck roast, the better it's going to hold up once it's wrapped and be less likely to wash away. If your chuck roast got into 150 degrees internally, but it's still a little bit dry on the outside and hasn't really developed a dark color and doesn't look like much of the fat on the outside has even started to render yet, then don't rush it. Let it smoke for another hour or two and then check it again. It's going to stay in this temperature range for a while. Let that bark develop a little more, let some more of the fat render on the outside, and then go ahead and wrap it. Lay out a few feet of butcher paper on a table long enough that you can roll the chuck roast a couple times in it. Spray it with some water or apple juice. It really doesn't matter, just something to get the paper nice and wet. This way it'll lay flat and be a lot more pliable and easy to work with. A lot of times with beef brisket, I'll spread some beef tallow, which is just rendered beef fat, to add some moisture inside. Today I'm using this canister of Bacon Up rendered bacon fat instead because I saw it on the shelf and figured, hey, why not? It looked fun to try out on this chuck roast. I go a lot more in depth on how to wrap with butcher paper in my electric smoker brisket video. I'll put a link to that up in the corner. Make sure to check that video out after this one if you haven't watched it. But basically we're going to spread a little bit of the Bacon Up down, put the chuck roast on top of it near one end of the butcher paper. And we want to keep track of which side of the chuck roast is up so that we can keep this nice bark intact while it's cooking wrapped. So I'm going to roll some butcher paper up over the top of the chuck roast and then fold in the sides once and then twice, kind of like a paper airplane. And then go ahead and smooth them out down towards the end. Then we roll it one time, trying to pull it nice and tight towards us. So now the top side is facing down. I realized here that I rolled out too much butcher paper initially. That's fine. It's better than not having enough. You can always cut a little bit off if you use too much. Then fold the far end in halfway towards the chuck roast one time to create a base layer of folded butcher paper, and then roll the chuck roast one more time now on top of this folded base layer so that the top side is back on top. I use that little folded base as a way to remind myself which side is the bottom when I'm moving it around. Go ahead and replace your probe thermometer back through the paper into the center of the meat and put it back in the electric smoker. You can obviously stop burning wood chips at this point too. The meat's not going to absorb any more smoke flavor through the butcher paper. You can also go ahead and close the top vent on your smoker at this point. We're not worried about airflow or developing bark anymore. And closing that vent will hopefully trap in a little extra heat and it'll cook a little faster. In fact, you can even finish the meat in your oven indoors at this point if the weather's bad or you're just trying to move it along a little faster. I still wouldn't set your oven any higher than 275 degrees, maybe 300 at the most. But at this point, it's wrapped. All we're doing is applying heat to get it to finish cooking. There's nothing special about cooking it in an electric smoker at this point. So whatever works for you, go ahead and do. This chuck roast took another 3 hours wrapped to rise from 160 degrees up to 203 degrees. This is our final target internal temperature, same as what we use for our brisket. But don't just go by internal temperature alone. You want to check the feel of the chuck roast and make sure that it's what's known as probe tender. This is where you want to use your instant read thermometer to check different parts of the chuck roast as it's getting close to that 203 degree level. In my case, although the meter reached 203 degrees internally and told me it was finished, when I checked with my instant read, it still didn't feel super tender in a few spots. You really want it to feel like you're putting that thermometer into a stick of room temperature butter, so almost no resistance. Poke a little hole in the paper first so you're not just feeling the resistance of the paper, and then check it in multiple spots to see how the meat really feels. I put mine back in for about 20 minutes, and after that, every area I checked was probe tender. 200 to 210 degrees Fahrenheit internally is generally going to be the best range to finish your chuck roast or your brisket so that it's still sliceable. I know some people like to pull their briskets at around 190 to 195 degrees. I've just found in my experience it's not tender enough for my liking. 203 degrees just always seems like the magic number. Once it's hit that internal temperature and it feels probe tender, you can take it out of the smoker, but don't unwrap it from the butcher paper just yet. Unwrapping the meat while it's still this hot can cause it to drop in temperature quickly and actually seize up and toughen up. We want the temperature to drop very, very slowly while it rests. That way the meat stays nice and tender. So let it rest for at least an hour before you unwrap it, preferably on a wire rack so that there's some airflow underneath it and that heat doesn't all get trapped on the bottom side of the chuck roast. Now, if you finished your chuck roast early, like we talked about before, and it's gonna be more than an hour until you wanna serve it, then I would rest it in an oven on the warm setting or back in your electric smoker set to 170 degrees Fahrenheit, which is typically about what the warm setting on an oven is. And still don't unwrap it. You wanna leave it right in the butcher paper until it's time to serve. It's about 203 degrees Fahrenheit internally right now, so putting it in a 170 degree oven or back in your electric smoker set to 170 degrees will help it slowly drop in temperature and do what we want it to do during that resting stage, while also keeping it at a food safe temperature until it's time to eat. In fact, this is exactly what many barbecue restaurants do by cooking their briskets ahead of time, either the day before or the night before, and then they hold them in warming ovens so that everything's ready to go at the dinner rush the next day. When you're trying to serve hundreds of briskets to a hungry crowd every day, you can't cook them all to be finished at the exact same time. So that's where these warming ovens really work to their advantage. That way everything stays hot and juicy and rested and is ready to go when you want to eat. Okay, we've let the chuck roast rest for about an hour since we took it out of the smoker. We're gonna go ahead and unwrap it now. I'm actually gonna unwrap it in this pan so we can keep everything contained a little better. It's like opening a Christmas present every time. Looks delicious. We're gonna try to save some of these juices here. All right, let's go ahead and slice into this chuck roast and see how we did. Now, when you're trying to find the grain on a chuck roast to slice perpendicular to it, you kind of just have to do your best because there's a lot of different pieces of meat running in different directions. It's kind of the beef equivalent of a pork shoulder in that regard. So we're just gonna kind of slice from one end to the other. If we remember, there was a vein of fat kind of running right down the middle here, and I'm going to kind of just use that as my grain line here to kind of slice along the edge here. So we'll do our best trying to keep everything together as if it was a brisket. These first couple pieces are going to more fall apart, but those will kind of be like our beef burnt ends in that regard. So we're going to kind of slice right down like that. Try to get a little slice going there. Yeah, it's still staying together. That's good. All right, go a little thinner on the next one if we can. I'm going to go a little thicker on the next one, see if we can keep it together a little better. There we go. All right, let's go ahead and try one of these pieces here. See that coming apart just like that. Not falling apart, but easy to pull apart. Get a piece with some bark on it. This is so good. It's so tender, but not falling apart completely. It's just right for what I was going for today. And you get that smoke right on the back of your palate, that mesquite, that hickory. You get the salt, the pepper, the garlic from that holy cow rub we used. Just really, really good beefy flavor all around. Now, if you want to just eat it in slices like this, you can pour some more of that jus that was in our butcher paper over the top of it. It's delicious. You can also make a sandwich out of it and do a little bit of barbecue sauce if you want. I know people are divided on whether to use barbecue sauce on beef, but hey, it's really up to you and what you like to eat. I'm gonna put a few slices on a brioche bun here with this Bachan's Japanese barbecue sauce. If you haven't tried this before and you're looking for something a little different than your conventional run-of-the-mill barbecue sauces, I would definitely give this brand of barbecue sauce a try. It's got a little more of a soy sauce flavor. So if you like that kind of Asian-inspired barbecue sauce flavor, I would definitely check this one out. We hope you enjoyed this video. Please let us know in the comments how your chuck roast turns out, and if you tried any other methods or variations. We always love hearing new ideas from our audience. And please make sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons if you want to get more content like this from our channel. And don't forget to head over to our website, madbackyard.com. We've got even more recipes and tips and how-to guides to help you get cooking in your electric smoker. I'll also put a link to the full step-by-step recipe for this chuck roast, as well as links to all the videos I mentioned and products I used today down in the description below. Thanks for watching. I'm gonna try a little bit on a brioche bun here with this bachans. I'm gonna put some on a brioche bun here with this bachans. I'm gonna put a little bit on a brioche bun. I'm gonna put a few slices on a brioche bun here with this bachan. I'm gonna put a few slices on a brioche bun here with this bachan's Japanese barbecue sauce. I'm gonna put a few slices on a brioche bun here with this bachan's Japanese barbecue sauce. I'll put a link to it down below, along with links to everything else we used today down in the description below.